So thanks y'all for letting me be here with you. I was thinking about camp in general, and I've been coming here since family camp when I was a little girl, and then Pyro CYF advanced. But more, I guess, important to me personally is I was thinking about how this is the place where I think I've had the most vocational conversations with myself and with God and with people. It was here that I decided to be a math major when I was on staff. I remember actually being with Steve Taylor. I was thinking about this a weekend ago, that I remember just thinking, yeah, math major. And then it was here in conversation with small groups that I said, no, I think I want to go to divinity school. And I've just had a lot of key moments in my life, and it's always good to be here. The special thing about an advanced conference in my mind is this is the place where people honestly wrestle without any holds barred, or however I say that. So anyway, I appreciate the wrestling that I've been seeing. I hate that I have to cut it short after today and go back to work, but it's just an honor to be here. So this is the topic. We're seeing God in the wild, and today we're seeing God in people. Yesterday we saw God in the violence, where we talked about where God is in the violence. And where is God in the violence? Where are we? Where are we? Where are we in the violence? There's where God is. Yay! So yesterday, Teresa she made a decision theologically. One of the things that you kind of have to decide when you start thinking about all this stuff is you got to think who is God, who is people, and you sort of got to start somewhere. And so she said, I'm going to start with who God is. And she talked about the limitless of God, and we began there with her yesterday. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool because I don't think there's a right answer as to where to begin. I don't think it's easy to separate out God from people. I was thinking we're the only species that really believes in God. So we sort of are responsible for this notion of God. And you could argue that we aren't existing without God. So we're sort of intertwined in this journey, in this thought experiment that we're doing together. So I thought instead I wanted to start with just people and thinking about, let's figure out who people are, and then maybe we should think about this God thing, just to kind of go the other direction. But that's not easy either, thinking about God and people. So I'm going to start out just thinking about the easy ones and some softballs. And I was going to have you guys brainstorm, but then I got a little carried away with Google. So I started thinking about just places and people that exhibit God, and my first one to go to was this married couple that I think all of us would agree we can see God in. And in general, I think we can, perhaps we're all here, so I'm assuming we can agree that when we're in this place, that it's kind of an easier place that we can acknowledge that God is present in people. But certainly, if God was only at camp, we'd be something. And that's kind of the whole point when we come here, is to remember that God is everywhere. One of the things that's influenced me a lot is doing different kinds of missions. I actually haven't done a lot with Habitat for Humanity, but I just took this picture. I stole this picture. Thinking about just ways that you see God in people outside church doors, whether we're serving with people, and thinking about where God is. But God isn't just in missions, and God isn't just at camp. You could also say God is wherever people are being activists. And one picture that I think harkens me to know, yeah, I can point to that and say I know God is present in this place, is thinking about movements that we have experienced in our country, in particular Martin Luther King Jr. But that's not all, so I kept going with people. And you know now I'm working as a chaplain. You heard Tim say that. And I think vocationally, I get to see God in action every day. When I work with so many people that actually get to help people, I feel like they talk about chaplains have this guilt or something because we walk around and watch people save people's lives. But I know that in trenches of hospitals, there are people that are showing the face of God every day. I have been in the classroom, taught math, and with a caveat, good teaching, I think, is where you can truly see God in people. Whether you've been in the classroom or as a teacher, I think you'd agree with that. But there's lots of vocations, I think, that we can demonstrate God. And there's also just us getting together and planning things, no matter what our vocation is. We've been talking a lot about some of the regional meetings, we talk a lot in our small groups about churches. Sometimes we experience the presence of God in church and sometimes we don't. But I think at our best, even when we're getting together and making decisions as community, no matter who we are, I think we can see the face of God on a good day. So I started just collecting all these pictures where I started seeing the face of God. And I thought, well, we got to be fair, because the truth is, politicians can show the face of God too. There's really, God is limitless, right? Anyway, I think as a young kid, certainly I was raised with the notion that God was present in this room, in this rendition of I think this is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Anyway, and you might even argue that you could see the face of God in politicians still. I mean, certainly we want to believe that the people making decisions are showing the face of God. And there are many people that would talk about the face of God in politicians. So we got to be fair. There's going to be places that we can see the face of God there. But it's not just them. Churches, at times, we can see the face of God. And there's different kinds of churches. So the one on the left is an Episcopal church. I thought it looked disciple-y. The one on the right, do you guys know who that is? Benny Hinn? Do you know who Benny Hinn is? Well, there are 500,000 people over there being touched by him. And literally, he will heal you if you go and watch him. But he does definitely show the face of God to people, or at least I think people would say that. There are many movements, I think, that we can say throughout history have shown the face of God. We don't have to stay within church walls, for sure. And I'm just going to show a few pictures to kind of bring these images into our conversations as we think about the face of God in our life. Take long, though, for us to look at that picture, those pictures, and start to argue, right? I wonder if there are people on that screen that maybe you would say, no, I think you need to take that one down, maybe? I wonder if I could keep going. Some of these I think might be questionable. And if I were making my own personal journal to myself, there are pictures I would not include about Audrey's idea of the faces of God. There's other pictures I could put up there that I think we could all agree shouldn't be up there. These are people. What do we do when all these different groups are claiming the face of God? What do we do when we want to say that God is in the face of people, but we see things that people are doing and we disagree with it? Who gets to decide who has the face of God and who doesn't? That's really the question. So my thought is that we really need to examine people. I wanted to do pictures to just kind of bring in the room just some realities that have been, that are, just to remind us this isn't a simple topic that we're charged with thinking about. So I'll tell you a little bit more about me. I am a chaplain now, but 7 years ago I lived in Lynchburg, Virginia. Does anybody know where Lynchburg is? Yay, I'm surprised. Lynchburg is in central Virginia, for those of you that don't know. It's actually a pretty cool town. One of the things I like to do when I move places is research it. And Lynchburg had the most freed blacks before the Civil War. I learned that. Lynchburg is home to a lot of liberal arts colleges. The folks around there are pretty cool. One college you might know about, Lynchburg College. Anybody go there? Know Lynchburg College? Been there? Lynchburg College is one of our disciples' colleges. Wonderful. It's actually just been renamed Lynchburg. I can't remember if Lynchburg University or University of Lynchburg, but that is us. That is a disciple school. They've got a lot of schools running out of it, so they changed it to university. But Lynchburg is also Jerry Falwell's hometown. If you don't know who Jerry Falwell is, he was a televangelist. He's now deceased, but he preached from Thomas Road Baptist Church. That is now Jonathan Falwell's church. He preaches on TV. You might know about him. Falwell, in 1971, decided to start our nation's first evangelical school where young Christian men and women could come study. They now have 110,000 students. That's a lot of students. To be a student there are codes you have to follow. Honor codes that include a very strict view of sexuality. Honor codes that include a very strict view and interpretation of the Bible. And did I mention 110,000 students? Lynchburg is a pretty small town, so when you go into, rapid directions there because of all these rivers. Anyway, but when you go to one part of the town, there's a mountain there that used to be called, it still is by natives of Lynchburg, Candler's Mountain. They bought it, they pretty much own the whole mountain. And there's a huge LU that if you go all around town, you can see Lynchburg University. So that's called Liberty Mountain by many in town, unless you're from Lynchburg, which, again, you don't call it that. But anyway, I was there and I served a wonderfully affirming, progressive disciples congregation. And this church became known as sort of a church of ill repute in the 90s. Students there that were LGBT often found our place, our church, and they found a place that they could sort of live into who they were called by God as being okay to be gay kind of things. I'm told, this doesn't happen, I don't think, anymore, but I'm told that in the 90s and the 80s, that students that left there had to fear being seen because there were people that would look for them and put their names on lists. So we at one time were known. Now that it's 110,000 students, it's expanded. I think their eye has gotten a little bit less strict. But that was the situation in the setting for my ministry. And after 3 years of ministry, I had an opportunity. They started a residency program. If you want to be a hospital chaplain, one of the best things you can do is a residency, kind of like doctors do a residency. So they had this program in Lynchburg, and I transitioned. I was a family life minister, and then sort of a de facto interim minister, and then I was doing chaplaincy basically full-time for about a year. So all this to tell you about this moment I had with this person. I'm working at this hospital, and I get a page. There was a patient that was about to have surgery. It was kind of a routine heart surgery, but she was nervous. And I walked in the door, and she looked at me kind of funny, and she said, "Were you the pastor at First Christian?" And I said, "Yeah, I was." And then she didn't touch it. She didn't go further, but she just kind of looked at me funny. We had this visit where she told me about her daughter, and she told me about the way she was worrying about her, and she told me about her concerns about her surgery and recovery, and I offered a prayer, and she let me pray for her. As I was leaving, she stopped me, and she said, "I want to tell you something," and I turn around, and she has tears in her eyes, and she says, "I just want to apologize." And I say, "Okay." Kind of thought I might know what's coming, but I said, "Okay, you don't need to do that." And she said, "Well, I just went to your church once, and I remember you. I remember you were in a robe." And she said, "I just remember feeling really uncomfortable." She said, I felt like there was an evil presence there." She said, "I was with my daughter, and we left. We just didn't feel like it was church." She said, "I was wrong. I'm sorry." thank you. And I left. I don't know what happened in that interaction, but I knew enough about my context that I wondered, was it because I was a female minister? Especially in the South, it's a bigger deal. Did she know I was gay? Did she see a gay couple holding hands? Was it something about the apparent affirmation of that? I don't get to know that. I didn't ask. But I've no doubt that I went up against some sort of assumption from her about me, and it was changed in our interaction. Maybe she bumped into the reality that God was present there too, even though at first she thought God wasn't. Trying to understand how to see God in people and what is God and what is not God is not easy. We do often rely on our guts, and sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's not. So, the question I had as I was thinking about this was, well, maybe it's just not worth thinking about. Maybe all people are good and the world's bad and that sucks, so... Or maybe we are just fallen and we need God's grace. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. Maybe answering this kind of question is like looking at one of those far-off stars that if you look at it head-on, you can't quite see, so maybe you just shouldn't look at it. You kind of see it out of the corner of your eye. So I'm going to take a break here from talking, and I'm going to invite you to talk. What I wanted to do is just introduce a couple of ideas about, I've given you a little bit to think about. I'm going to give you 3 more voices into our discussion. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you after, I'm going to kind of give you a snapshot of these, and then I'm going to pass these out. And I'm going to ask you to think about this. Which of the voices resonates with you most and least? What would you add or delete? Why? Anyway, I'll give you about 10 minutes or so in groups of 3, but let me tell you the first. So the first voice comes from a podcast called On Being with Krista Tippett. She had 2 activists. One was Muslim, both were African American, one was Muslim, one was Christian, and the one I'm going to use is from Lucas Johnson, this idea that he has that we are born with a desire for goodness. The context, and I included on this, the context on the back of your handout. It's kind of long, and if you're like me, you just want to hear it before you read it. And the context is his movement. He is part of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. And he talks about in the 40s when his movement went to India to learn from Gandhi about peace and change because they were bringing it back to America. They wanted to help to integrate the South. They were trying to figure out ways to do that. And what happened was they had a debate within their organization. And the debate that happened was whether or not using the tactics, taking an integrated bus to the South, whether or not doing that would provoke Southerners to violence and therefore invite Southerners to moral injury. In other words, was it true to our convictions if we did something that was provocative in that sense? And the organization's answer, and his answer that he agreed with, was no. He said, no, we need to do this because we need to show a mirror to the Southerners to see what this violence has made them become, because we are born with a desire for goodness. So he made that claim. He decided that was true. I don't know if it's true. The second one is, the second voice is, I got from TED Talk Radio Hour with Sally Cohn. She is an LGBT activist and political commentator, and she apparently was bullied on Twitter. Shocking, I know. But she was bullied on Twitter, and she got in touch with her own bullying and decided to write a book about it. And she, in her research, she was trying to see if we're sort of just programmed to be bullies. And so this is what she said. She said, way back when we were in our loincloths, we were sitting together, banging rocks together, and you know, some strange people we didn't know came over the hill, and we were afraid of them. And she says what she learned was that we're hardwired to hate, but our context teaches us who to hate. So that was her conjecture. The good news, she said, is that means we can unlearn who to hate. The last voice, have any of you read The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas? Such a good book. I learned about it because my niece is going to be in 9th grade, and she had to read it last year, and then her sister, my other niece, is reading it. Great book. And I wanted to introduce just a voice from that. It's about a young African-American girl who witnesses her friend murdered by a police officer. This is, there's sort of a running theme about understanding Tupac and the music that the prophet that he was. And the quote that I'm giving you, Tupac said, "Thug life," I want you to think about the acronym THUG. Thug life stood for the hate you give. You hear the thug, the hate you give. Little infants fucks everybody. The idea is, as infants are born, we pass on the hate we experience and then use it, figure out where to put it, and it fucks everybody. This is the other quote. Daddy once told me there's a rage passed down to every black man from his ancestors, born from the moment they couldn't stop the slave masters from hurting their families. Daddy also said there's nothing more dangerous than when that rage is activated. So I'm going to pass out these ideas about how we are wired, who we are as people, and I want you to discuss with each other that. I don't think these questions about who we are have had answers, and I hope you realize we don't have to agree. But I want to tell you, you get to hear my perspective, and you know I am a former math teacher. And what I love about math is that the more you ask questions like this, the hard questions, the more you end up coming up against what I would call an axiom. If you're a math person, you're like, oh yeah. If you're not, I'll tell you, an axiom is basically like when parents say, because I said so. Mathematicians use words like axiomatic. And this is what an axiom is defined as a statement or proposition which is regarded as being established, accepted, or self-evidently true. It can't be proven. And so we're bumping up, I think, in these kinds of conversations with things that can't be proven. For Euclid, in planar geometry, axioms, some important ones that you might remember from geometry, 2 points make a line. Do you remember learning that? The shortest distance between 2 points is a line. Any straight line segment can be extended indefinitely in a straight line. You can read the rest. I know you don't really care about that, right? Maybe you do. Because what we're really talking about is seeing God in people. But here it is. Once we agree on some concepts that can't be proven, we can build arguments, right? In math, there's a whole two-dimensional space that can be born once we just agree on a few things. And using those agreements, we can build things. We can make entire civilizations. And here's what's cool about math, I think, is that if we change our axioms, we can build things differently. In fact, things can be seen differently. Here's what a triangle looks like for Euclid, right? Two-dimensional space. But what if we aren't living in a flat world? What if the world was round? Well, if that's the case, then all those axioms that Euclid came up with, they're going to change just slightly. And so when we start thinking about what a triangle looks like, it looks a little bit different if we're in a sphere, doesn't it? And if we even get a little bit more creative and think about something we haven't experienced, like a hyperbola. Do you remember what a hyperbola is? I know Josh knows. We bond on math. Yeah. What if the world was shaped like a hyperbola? So what if we change our axioms a little bit? Everything relates a little bit differently. Then what would a triangle look like? And so thank you, Google. They kind of helped me show you a little bit different. I think math helps us see that our axioms, or the premises by which we view and understand the world, shape everything we do and say. Sometimes we're not even aware of it, and yet our world is built on it either way. So when we say that you cannot see God in some people, it might change the way we behave. It might even change the way that we feel in a situation. It can make some people look scary. Can make the unknown dubious at best. It allowed Rwandan political politician Leon Mugesera to call the minority group, the Tutsis, cockroaches. It helped create a genocide of a whole people. When we say that God loves the saved only, what does that do for our interactions with brothers and sisters on this planet who aren't Christian? I can tell you, it allowed our nation to enslave the heathens from Africa. I remember my professor at divinity school telling us that it was when slaves in our history started becoming Christian that the white slave master was challenged. Our foundational beliefs do alter our perceptions of the world. They just do. I'll tell you a little bit about me and my own stuff. When I was in college, I dated this guy named Deep, and I forgot to ask Josh. Do you remember meeting Deep? Yes. He was such an open guy. He came here. So here's a guy that came from India to a lily white college at Hanover, Indiana, 1,200 people in the middle of nowhere, majored in math and computer science. He's now a computer scientist in Canada. But I remember him telling me that when he would walk around campus, he said, I just feel like people are looking at me funny. And I remember saying to him, you are paranoid. I think you're imagining that, Deep. Everybody loves you. I did that. I remember being with his friends. He had, I was in the international club. And I remember being with his friends, some of them Indian, some of them Argentinian. And one of them was talking about going into town and being called a sand N-word. I'd never heard that. I remember when he told the story, I was shocked, appropriately. And he laughed about it, and I remember laughing right along with him, thinking, boy, those people, they must be lunatics. That's just crazy townies. That's not most people. They're not the norm. It was like I couldn't quite hear it fully. Sometimes what we believe prevents us from truly hearing people and then not fully connecting with them. I think this conversation of whether and how God is in people is difficult, but I do think it's worth it. Because sometimes we don't realize what we believe is hurting people and hurting our ability to connect with people. So how do we know what to believe? We're all different. We know that anytime you get two people together, even if we're at camp, where we say we grew up in disciple churches, we got two different opinions, and then we add a third person, it gets pretty tough to figure out what to believe. So I want to offer this idea. There's a 20th century philosopher named Otto Neurath. He once said that we are like sailors who on the open sea must reconstruct their ship, but are never able to start afresh from the bottom. We're like a sea. We're in open water, and we need to reconstruct our faith, our disbelief, our theology in open water. That means if we start tearing the whole thing apart, we're going to sink, right? So we got to do it word by word. I'm not saying there's an exact answer, but I am suggesting that this boat has to be changed slowly. Because with a living faith, we can't just take it all away, or we'll sink as a community, we'll sink as individuals. But if we don't examine it, we might not realize what we're thinking and doing until it's too late. I have a short story. My friend Kara is a minister. When she was in divinity school, she was a chaplain also in Eastern Kentucky. And Eastern Kentucky, the hospital she was at, got all of the life flights from rural Kentucky. And one of her stories was about a snake handling church that a person was life flighted in. He'd been bit by a snake, and it had not been the first time. So because he'd been bit a number of times, he wasn't going to make it. I remember Kara saying that she worried that the family would receive the news as though he did not have enough faith. We knew, as good students of the Bible, that they were picking that verse from Mark 16. They will pick up snakes in their hands, and if they drink any deadly thing, it will not hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. So we thought, uh-oh, or she thought, uh-oh. But she told me they didn't respond that way. She said the family cried and they prayed and they told stories, as many families do.
They lamented how great a preacher he was and how close to God he was. Perhaps their axiom of the grace of God and the love that God had for this patriarch and their family was greater than that axiom that God would save them from any deadly poison. I don't know if that church still does stake handling. I believe that's the next generation's decision. Christopher Morse helps me wrestle with questions like this, and I'm going to end with just some ideas that he has helped me with as I try to navigate all these waters. And full whatever, this is Christopher Morse. He's an old 83-year-old white guy. But he's great. And he says, that was so mean. I like, my stepdad's an 82-year-old white guy, and he's wonderful. This is what he says. He says, there's a charge from God upon the Christian community to discern the will of God again in every generation, time and place, and be watchful for those aspects of the tradition that are unfaithful to the will and word of God. For him, it's every generation's ability and responsibility to decide what is of God and what is not of God. It's every generation's responsibility to decide who is godly and who is not godly. He says, this is a quote, running through the traditions of Scripture within the Bible, there is what might be called a term, faithful disbelief. A key instance of this is most simply expressed in words of First Epistle of John. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out in the world. That's what he bases his scripture on. He says this charge not to believe every spirit is addressed to the community seeking to be faithful to God, a community that apparently recognizes itself when addressed as beloved. This is who we are. We are God's beloved here, wrestling with God's voice, wrestling with God's heart, wrestling with God's people, and perhaps we should do what Morse does. Instead of starting out with what we should believe about God or what we should believe about people, Morse instead starts out with what we shouldn't believe. He starts out saying, let's figure out what the landmines are among us in the Christian theology we need to avoid. These are some of his. One, we need to avoid a refusal to believe that any situation is hopeless. Any situation. A refusal to believe that we are truly human apart from other humans. A refusal to believe that church members are more loved than non-church members. And last, a refusal to believe that the church is limited by the success and failures of its members. I mostly bring you homework this morning, I'm aware of that. As we look for God and people, I'm tasking you to first listen for yourself. Hear the implicit assumptions that you are walking around with. We all are doing. Listen to others who give you clues as to how the world hears your footsteps in the world. And listen with God's ears to those places where people are crying out, where people are trying to tell you their story. And at the same time, beloved, we must go forth. Go forth witnessing the depth of human experience, not just the sunshine and roses parts of being human, but witnessing who we are in this world, even the ugly and broken parts of us too. Look at us square in the eye. It will take God to do this, but I believe God will give us strength. And when we can do that, I believe God will help us to see how God is working in us still. Despite us, despite the world, despite the violence, God is in it, but I think we have to be paying attention. Because it is in witnessing to ourselves, or listening to our stories, that God will be seen. And I believe, in so doing, we will see glimpses of the divine as God sees the divine in us, and our world will be changed. I'm going to end with a prayer of St. Francis. He was the saint of the animals, but I think he had people figured out pretty good. Let us pray. Lord, make us an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born into eternal life. Amen.